The warm summer air carried the scent of honeysuckle and hope, as Hannah Turner stood at the edge of the crowded dance hall, her fingers nervously smoothing the folds of her blue calico dress. It was 1878 in Willow Creek, a small but thriving settlement in the Colorado Territory, and the annual Founders' Day celebration was in full swing. Hannah had arrived in town just 3 weeks prior, still feeling like an outsider among the close-knit community. At 22, she had traveled west after her parents' passing, answering her uncle's invitation to help run his general store. Now, watching the whirling couples on the dance floor, Hannah felt more alone than ever, certain that no one would ask the newcomer to dance. Hannah tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and adjusted the simple silver locket at her throat, the last gift from her mother. The musicians struck up another lively tune as townspeople laughed and danced. Her uncle had encouraged her to attend, insisting it would help her meet people, but now she regretted coming. She didn't know anyone well enough to approach them, and the few young men who glanced her way quickly returned their attention to the local girls they'd known all their lives. "Might as well count the floorboards," she murmured to herself, trying to ignore the ache of loneliness. Hannah had never been particularly graceful, but she loved to dance. Back home in Boston, she'd at least had childhood friends who would good-naturedly partner with her. Here, she was a stranger, the quiet Eastern girl who spoke too properly and knew nothing about frontier life. From across the room, Vaughn Adler leaned against the rough-hewn wall, his hat tipped low over his eyes as he surveyed the celebration. At 26, he had already earned a reputation as one of the fastest guns and finest horsemen in 3 territories. His tall frame and broad shoulders drew admiring glances from the local girls, but Vaughn had little interest in the attention. He'd come to town to deliver a herd of cattle to the Hammond Ranch, intending to stay just long enough to rest his horse before moving on. The ranch foreman had insisted he join the celebration, though dancing had never been Vaughn's strong suit. He preferred the open range to crowded gatherings, the company of his horse to that of most people. But something, or rather someone, had caught his eye tonight, a young woman in a blue dress standing alone, looking as out of place as he felt. Vaughn watched as Hannah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes following the dancers with unmistakable longing. There was something refreshingly genuine about her, a stark contrast to the practiced flirtations he usually encountered. When he saw her discreetly wipe away what appeared to be a tear, something inside him stirred. Before he could reconsider, Vaughn pushed himself away from the wall and made his way through the crowd. His spurs jingled softly with each step, and he removed his hat as he approached Hannah, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Evenin', miss," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "I couldn't help but notice you haven't had the chance to dance yet." Hannah looked up, startled by the tall stranger addressing her. His face was tanned from the sun, with striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. She recognized him vaguely as one of the cowboys who had ridden in with the cattle drive earlier that week. "Oh, Hannah stammered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm afraid I don't know many people here yet." A smile tugged at the corner of Vaughn's mouth, creating a small dimple in his right cheek. "Well, now you know me, Vaughn Adler, at your service." He gave a slight bow that was both playful and respectful. "Hannah Turner," she replied, returning a tentative smile. "Miss Turner," Vaughn said, extending his hand as the band began to play a slower tune, "would you do me the honor of saving me every dance for the remainder of this evening?" Hannah blinked in surprise, certain she had misheard him. "Every dance, but surely you'd want to every dance," he confirmed with a quiet confidence that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "That is, if you're willing to risk your toes with a cowboy who spends more time in a saddle than on a dance floor." Hannah felt a genuine smile spread across her face for the first time that evening. "I would be delighted, Mr. Adler, though I should warn you I'm not considered the most graceful dancer myself." "Then we'll be perfectly matched," Vaughn replied, leading her toward the dance floor. His hand was calloused but surprisingly gentle as it enveloped hers. As they took their positions among the other couples, Hannah noticed several curious glances. Vaughn Adler was apparently well known enough to draw attention, and she could feel the questioning looks from the local girls who had likely hoped to catch his eye. "People are staring," Hannah whispered as Vaughn placed his hand respectfully at her waist. "Let them," he answered simply. "I'm just grateful you're saving me from having to make excuses to the mayor's daughter. She stepped on my feet 3 times at previous gatherings, and I'm not sure my boots could take another assault." Hannah laughed despite herself, and as the music swelled around them, she found that dancing with Vaughn came surprisingly naturally. He moved with the same fluid grace he likely showed on horseback, guiding her through the steps with subtle pressure from his hand at her back. For the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, Hannah felt the tension leave her shoulders. "You're not nearly as clumsy as you claimed, Miss Turner," Vaughn observed as they completed a turn. "And you dance far better than a man who spends his days in a saddle has any right to," she countered. They continued through the dance, conversation flowing more easily than Hannah would have expected with a stranger. She learned that Vaughn had been working cattle drives for 8 years, that he'd grown up in Texas, but considered the open range his true home, and that he had a remarkable horse named Maverick who was, in his words, "smarter than most men I've met." When the music ended, Hannah expected him to politely excuse himself, his obligation to the wallflower fulfilled. Instead, he kept her hand in his and led her to the refreshment table, getting them both cups of punch before the musicians started up the next song. "You don't have to stay with me all evening," Hannah said, though she found herself hoping he would. "I'm sure there are others you'd prefer to dance with." Vaughn's eyes met hers steadily. "I meant what I said, Miss Turner, every dance if you'll have me," and so they danced. One song after another, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the music and movement together. Hannah found herself relaxing into his arms, forgetting her self-consciousness as the evening progressed. When they finally stepped outside to catch the evening breeze, the stars were bright overhead. "Thank you, Mr. Adler," Hannah said softly. "This evening turned out much differently than I expected." "Call me Vaughn," he replied, still holding her hand, "and I should be thanking you. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much at one of these gatherings." Hannah looked up at him, trying to read the expression in his eyes. "Will you be staying in Willow Creek long?" A shadow crossed Vaughn's face. "I'm due to head out with the sunrise. There's another herd waiting 50 miles south." "Oh." Hannah tried to hide her disappointment. Of course he was leaving men like him always were passing through. She'd been foolish to imagine anything more from this chance encounter. Vaughn seemed to sense her thoughts. "But I find myself wishing for a reason to delay my departure." Their eyes met again, and Hannah felt her pulse quicken. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from inside the hall. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful moment. "Wait here," Vaughn instructed, instantly alert. He strode back inside, hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. Hannah hesitated only briefly before following. Inside, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. A group of rough-looking men had entered trail hands from a rival outfit, based on the snippets of conversation Hannah could hear. They'd clearly been drinking heavily before arriving, and one of them had appended a table of refreshments after being refused a dance by a local girl. "Now, gentlemen," the mayor was saying, trying to calm the situation. "This is a peaceful celebration. Perhaps it would be best if you came back when you're in a more sociable state." "We're plenty sociable," growled the largest of the newcomers, a burly man with a scraggly beard. "Ain't our fault if your townsfolk are too high and mighty to mix with honest working men." Vaughn had positioned himself between the troublemakers and the rest of the partygoers. "The mayor asked you nicely," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I suggest you take him up on his offer to return another time." The bearded man sized Vaughn up, recognition dawning on his face. "Well, if it ain't Vaughn Adler, heard you was fast with a gun. Never figured you for a dancing man, though." His eyes traveled past Vaughn to where Hannah stood, and his expression turned unpleasant. "That your girl, pretty little thing?" Hannah felt her skin crawl at the way the man looked at her, but she stood her ground, lifting her chin slightly. "The lady is under my protection," Vaughn stated flatly, "as is everyone in this room. Now, why don't you and your friends head back to your camp before this turns into something we'll all regret?" For a tense moment, Hannah feared the man would escalate the confrontation, but something in Vaughn's steady gaze must have convinced him it wasn't worth the trouble. With a dismissive gesture, he signaled to his companions. "Come on, boys. These folks are too fancy for our company anyway." He shot a final look at Vaughn. "See you on the trail, Adler." As the group departed, the room collectively exhaled. The band hesitantly struck up another tune, attempting to restore the celebratory atmosphere. Hannah approached Vaughn, who was watching the doorway with narrowed eyes. "That was brave," she said quietly. Vaughn turned to her, his expression softening. "Not particularly. Men like that are usually all bluster." He offered her a reassuring smile. "Now, I believe I was promised every dance and the night isn't over yet." They returned to the dance floor, but Hannah could feel a subtle change in Vaughn's demeanor. There was a new tension in his shoulders, and his eyes occasionally drifted to the entrance. As the evening drew to a close, Vaughn escorted Hannah to her uncle's store where she lived in the rooms above. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet now, with only the occasional light glowing from a window or the saloon down the road. "I had a wonderful time," Hannah said as they reached the store's porch. "Thank you for making my first social event in town memorable." Vaughn removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "The pleasure was mine, Miss Turner, Hannah." He hesitated, then continued. "I meant what I said earlier. I find myself reluctant to leave Willow Creek so soon." Hannah felt a fluttering in her chest. "Perhaps you could return." "After your business is concluded, perhaps I could." Vaughn stepped closer, his expression serious. "Would you mind if I called on you when I do?" "I would like that very much," Hannah admitted, feeling bolder than she had in years. In the soft glow of the lamplight, Vaughn took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "Until we meet again, Hannah Turner." As Hannah watched him walk away, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the darkness, she couldn't help but wonder if she would indeed see Vaughn Adler again, or if, like so many encounters in these frontier towns, their dance was destined to be just a fleeting memory. Morning came with a spectacular sunrise painting the Colorado sky in hues of pink and gold. Hannah had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with dancing and the memory of Vaughn's steady blue eyes. She rose early to help her uncle prepare the store for opening, trying not to watch the road for signs of departing cattle drivers. "You seem different this morning," Uncle Henry observed as they arranged a new shipment of dry goods. A widower in his 50s with kind eyes and a practical nature, he had welcomed Hannah into his home without hesitation after her parents' passing. "I take it you enjoyed the celebration last night." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "It was pleasant enough." "Pleasant enough to keep you dancing with Vaughn Adler all evening." Henry's eyes twinkled with gentle teasing. "Word travels fast in small towns, my dear." "We simply kept each other company," Hannah replied, focusing intently on aligning cans of peaches. Henry chuckled. "Well, whatever you call it, I haven't seen you smile so much since you arrived." Before Hannah could respond, the bell above the door jangled. She turned, her heart inexplicably racing, but it was only Mrs. Patterson coming in for her weekly supplies. Hannah greeted the older woman politely, trying to hide her disappointment. Throughout the morning, Hannah found herself glancing at the door each time the bell rang and peering out the windows between customers. By midday, she had resigned herself to the fact that Vaughn had indeed left with the sunrise as planned. She chided herself for allowing a single evening to take up so much space in her thoughts. Just after noon, when Hannah was organizing the ledger at the counter, the door opened once more. This time it was Sheriff Daniels, his expression serious beneath his gray mustache. "Miss Turner," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Is your uncle available?" "He's in the storeroom," Hannah replied, noting the tension in the lawman's demeanor. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" The older man hesitated. "There was some trouble out at the crossroads this morning. Nothing for you to worry about, but I need to speak with Henry about it." Uncle Henry emerged from the back, wiping his hands on his apron. "Tom, what brings you by?" The sheriff gestured toward the back room. "Mind if we speak privately?" As the two men disappeared into the storeroom, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that whatever trouble had occurred might involve the cattle drive and Vaughn. She tried to continue with her work, but found herself straining to catch snippets of the men's conversation. When they finally emerged, her uncle's face was grave. He approached Hannah, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "What is it?" she asked, her apprehension growing. "There was an incident with the cattle drive heading south," Henry explained gently. "Apparently they were ambushed about 5 miles out of town, likely by those same troublemakers from the dance last night. 2 of the drivers were wounded." Hannah's heart seemed to stop. She couldn't even form the question. Understanding dawned in Henry's eyes. "Vaughn Adler." He glanced at the sheriff, who nodded confirmation. "Adler was one of them," Sheriff Daniels said. "Took a bullet in the shoulder from what I hear. They've brought the injured men to Doc Miller's." Relief and concern washed over Hannah in equal measure. "Wounded but alive. How serious is it?" "Doc's tending to them now," the sheriff replied. "The other fellow caught it worse, bullet lodged near his spine. Adler was lucky clean through the shoulder." Hannah untied her apron with trembling fingers. "Uncle Henry, go," he said without hesitation. "I can manage the store." "Take some of those bandages from the back shelf, Doc might need them." With a grateful nod, Hannah gathered the supplies and hurried out into the street. Doc Miller's office was just 3 buildings down, a small whitewashed structure with a shingle declaring physician and surgeon hanging above the door. When Hannah entered, she found the waiting area empty but could hear voices from the examination room. She hesitated, unsure if she should intrude, when the doctor's assistant, a young woman named Sarah, emerged from the back. "Miss Turner," she said, looking surprised. "Are you ill?" "No, I heard about the wounded men from the cattle drive. I brought some extra bandages." Hannah held up the package, "And I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "Your concern is kind. We've got the situation under control now, but additional bandages are always welcome." She accepted the package. "Mr. Adler is resting. Doc removed the bullet and stitched him up about an hour ago." "Will he recover?" Hannah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "With proper care, yes. The bullet missed anything vital, but he's lost blood and will need to keep the arm immobile for a while." Sarah studied Hannah's face. "Would you like to see him? He's sedated, but sometimes it helps to have a friendly face nearby when patients wake." Hannah nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Sarah led her to a small recovery room at the back of the building. Inside, Vaughn lay on a narrow bed, his upper body bare except for the thick bandages wrapped around his left shoulder and chest. His face was pale against the pillow, making the dark stubble on his jaw stand out in stark contrast. He seemed both vulnerable and strong in his unconscious state. "I'll leave you with him," Sarah said quietly. "Call if you need anything. Doc is still with the other patient." When Sarah had gone, Hannah approached the bedside cautiously. She sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, her eyes taking in Vaughn's features, the long lashes resting against his cheeks, the small scar near his right eyebrow she hadn't noticed during their dances, the steady rise and fall of his chest that reassured her he was indeed going to be all right. Without thinking, she reached out and gently took his right hand in hers. It was warm and solid, the skin rough from years of work. "You know," she said softly, "when you mentioned finding a reason to stay in Willow Creek longer, this wasn't quite what I had in mind." Hannah thought she imagined the slight pressure of his fingers against hers, but then Vaughn's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with pain and whatever medicine the doctor had given him, but they focused on her face with undisguised pleasure. "Hannah," he murmured, his voice raspy. "You're here." "Of course I'm here," she replied, fighting the urge to smooth the hair from his forehead. "Where else would I be when my dance partner goes and gets himself shot?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sorry to disappoint, afraid I won't be much good for dancing for a while." "Then I suppose we'll have to find other ways to pass the time while you recover," Hannah said, surprised at her own boldness. "That is, if you're staying in Willow Creek until you heal." Vaughn's eyes held hers. "Seems I don't have much choice now." "No," Hannah agreed, returning the gentle pressure of his fingers with her own. "It seems you don't." Over the next 2 weeks, Hannah fell into a routine. Mornings were spent helping her uncle in the store, afternoons visiting Vaughn as he recovered at the small boarding house where Doc Miller had arranged a room for him. The doctor had declared him well enough to leave medical supervision after 3 days, provided he rested and kept his arm in a sling. Hannah brought him meals, books from her own small collection, and news from around town. At first, their conversations were tentative, both acutely aware of how little they truly knew about each other despite the connection they'd felt on the dance floor. But gradually, the barriers between them began to fall. She learned that Vaughn had lost his parents young and been raised by an uncle who taught him ranching. That he'd spent his adolescence working cattle on spreads across Texas before striking out on his own at 18. That he dreamed of having his own ranch someday, a place where he could put down roots after years of drifting. In turn, Hannah shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's work as a bookkeeper, her mother's love of music, the devastating illness that had taken them both within months of each other. She told him about her decision to come west, seeking not just her uncle's protection but a fresh start in a place where the memories weren't so overwhelming. "Do you miss city life?" Vaughn asked one afternoon as they sat on the boarding house porch. His color had returned and he'd regained much of his strength, though he still wore the sling. "All the theaters and fancy shops and such." Hannah considered the question, watching a pair of children chase each other down the dusty main street. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I'm finding things to appreciate here. The open sky, the way everyone knows each other, the simplicity of it all." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "It's a different kind of beauty out here, takes time to see it properly. Like dancing with a stranger at a town celebration." Hannah asked with a small smile. "Exactly like that," he replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Sometimes the best things find us when we're not looking." As Vaughn's recovery progressed, Hannah found herself increasingly dreading the day he would be well enough to leave. The cattle drive had continued south with a replacement crew, but Vaughn had received word that his employer expected him back as soon as he was fit to ride. Neither of them spoke about his inevitable departure, but it hung between them like an unspoken deadline. One evening, as Hannah was closing up the store, Sheriff Daniels stopped by again. His expression was serious as he approached the counter. "Evening, Miss Turner, your uncle around." "He's making a delivery to the Wilsons' farm," Hannah replied, instantly alert to the tension in the lawman's manner. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" Daniels removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Maybe nothing. But I thought you should know we got word that Buck Harley and his boys were spotted in Cottonwood yesterday." Hannah frowned. "Buck Harley, the troublemaker from the dance, the one we suspect led the ambush on the cattle drive." The sheriff's eyes were kind but concerned. "He's been making noise about settling scores with Adler. Apparently, one of the men wounded in the firefight was his cousin, and he's not taking it well that his kin might never walk again." A cold fear settled in Hannah's stomach. But that's absurd. Vaughn was defending himself and the herd. "You and I know that, but Harley isn't known for his reasoned thinking." Sheriff Daniels put his hat back on. "I've already spoken to Adler about this. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of the situation too." After the sheriff left, Hannah locked up the store quickly and hurried to the boarding house. She found Vaughn on the porch as usual, but there was a new tension in his posture. When he saw her hurrying up the walk, he stood. "You've heard," he said, not a question. Hannah nodded, slightly breathless from her quick pace. "Sheriff Daniels just told me. Vaughn, what are you going to do?" He gestured for her to sit beside him on the porch swing. "I've been thinking about that. Doc says I can travel in another week or so. Might be best if I move on before Harley decides to bring his grievances to Willow Creek." "You're leaving?" The words came out more sharply than Hannah intended. Vaughn's good hand covered hers where it rested on the swing between them. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Hannah. To anyone here. So you'll just ride away. Let this man chase you from town to town with his misplaced vengeance. It wouldn't be the first time I've had to move on because of someone's grudge," Vaughn said quietly. "It's part of life out here." Hannah stood abruptly, pacing the small porch. "That's not right. You shouldn't have to leave because some bully has decided to blame you for his cousin's poor choices." Vaughn watched her with a mixture of admiration and resignation. "What would you have me do? Wait for him to come gunning for me in the middle of Main Street? Risk innocent people getting caught in the crossfire? No, of course not." Hannah stopped pacing, her mind racing. "But there must be another solution, one that doesn't involve you disappearing into the sunset." Later that night, Hannah lay awake in her bed above the store, turning over possibilities in her mind. She had grown to care deeply for Vaughn Adler in the short time she'd known him. The thought of him leaving, especially under threat, filled her with an ache she hadn't anticipated. Morning brought clarity and determination. After helping her uncle open the store, Hannah made her way to Sheriff Daniels' office, a plan forming in her mind. To her surprise, she found Vaughn already there, deep in conversation with the lawman. Both men looked up as she entered, and Hannah didn't miss the way Vaughn's eyes brightened at the sight of her, despite the serious discussion she'd interrupted. "Miss Turner," the sheriff greeted her. "What brings you by this morning?" "I've been thinking about the situation with Buck Harley," she said, getting straight to the point. "And I believe I might have a suggestion." Vaughn raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at his lips despite the circumstances. "Why am I not surprised?" Hannah outlined her idea. Instead of waiting passively for Harley to make a move or having Vaughn flee town, they could send word to the territorial marshal about the ambush and Harley's threats. With an official warrant, the law could apprehend Harley before he caused more trouble and Vaughn wouldn't have to leave Willow Creek. "It could work," Sheriff Daniels mused, stroking his mustache. "Marshal Reynolds is due to pass through Cottonwood in the next few days anyway. I could send a telegram outlining the situation. But would it be fast enough?" Vaughn asked, his practical nature asserting itself. "Harley's not the patient type." "That's why we spread the word that you've already left town," Hannah continued. "Let people think you moved on as soon as you heard Harley was making threats. Meanwhile, you stay out of sight until the marshal has handled the situation." Both men stared at her with newfound respect. "That's actually quite clever," the sheriff admitted. "Where exactly would I stay out of sight?" Vaughn asked, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. "My uncle's store has a small cabin behind it. It was the original trading post before he built the larger building. It's basic but comfortable enough. No one would think to look for you there." Sheriff Daniels scratched his chin thoughtfully. "It could work. We'd need to move Adler tonight when fewer people are about. I'll send the telegram to Marshal Reynolds this afternoon. You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Vaughn said to Hannah as they left the sheriff's office, walking side by side down the boardwalk. Hannah felt a blush creep up her neck. "I couldn't sleep last night, thinking about you riding away with that man hunting you." Vaughn stopped walking, turning to face her. His eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Why does it matter so much to you whether I stay or go, Hannah Turner?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. They stood in the middle of the boardwalk, the morning sun warming the air around them, the bustle of the town fading into the background as Hannah considered her answer. "Because," she finally said, her voice soft but steady. "In the short time I've known you, Vaughn Adler, you've become important to me. More important than I expected anyone to become in this new life of mine." Vaughn's expression softened, and he reached out with his good hand to gently touch her cheek. "You've become important to me too, Hannah. Important enough that I'd risk facing Buck Harley if it meant having more time with you." The moment was interrupted by a passing wagon, forcing them to step aside. The spell broken, they continued walking, both acutely aware of the shift that had just occurred between them. That evening, under cover of darkness, Vaughn moved into the cabin behind the general store. It was indeed basic, just one room with a bed, table, stove, and washstand, but it was clean and secure. Hannah and her uncle helped him settle in, bringing food, books, and other necessities to make his confinement more comfortable. "I'll check on the store at midnight and dawn," Uncle Henry told Vaughn as they prepared to leave him for the night. "If you need anything in between, there's a bell on the back door of the main building. Ring it softly, and Hannah or I will hear." When her uncle stepped outside to give them a moment alone, Hannah found herself suddenly shy. "Will you be comfortable enough?" Vaughn sat on the edge of the narrow bed, looking around the small space. "More comfortable than many places I've slept. Don't worry about me, Hannah." "I can't seem to help it," she admitted with a small smile. "Worrying about you, that is." "Well," he said, standing and moving closer to her, "that makes two of us. Because I find myself worrying about you too, especially now that you've involved yourself in my troubles." "There are troubles now," Hannah replied softly. "That's what happens when you ask someone to save you every dance." Vaughn's eyes darkened with emotion. "Hannah," he murmured, his hand coming up to cup her cheek again. This time there was no passing wagon to interrupt them. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Vaughn lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief and tender, but it left Hannah feeling as though she'd been struck by lightning. When they parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I woke up and saw you sitting beside my hospital bed." "I'm glad you waited until you weren't delirious with pain and medicine," Hannah replied with a breathless laugh. A soft knock at the door reminded them they weren't alone. Hannah reluctantly stepped back, her fingers lingering on Vaughn's good arm. "I'll bring breakfast in the morning." "I'll be counting the hours," he replied. The next 3 days passed in a strange mix of tension and contentment. Hannah divided her time between helping at the store, maintaining the pretense that Vaughn had left town, and spending every possible moment with him in the small cabin. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams, discovering the many ways their different lives had shaped them into people who understood each other on a fundamental level. In the close quarters of the cabin, their relationship deepened rapidly. Each lingering touch, each shared look, each kiss that grew increasingly passionate told Hannah that what was growing between them was unlike anything she had experienced before. For the first time since losing her parents, she felt truly alive again and terrified of losing this newfound happiness. On the 4th day, Sheriff Daniels brought news. Marshal Reynolds had received his telegram and apprehended Buck Harley in Cottonwood on an outstanding warrant from another territory. The immediate threat had passed. "You're free to come out of hiding," the sheriff told Vaughn with a smile. "Though from what I hear, your confinement hasn't been too burdensome." That evening, Vaughn joined Hannah and her uncle for dinner in their living quarters above the store, his first public appearance since going into hiding. The simple domestic scene stirred something in Hannah's heart. Vaughn laughing with Uncle Henry over a shared joke, helping her clear the dishes despite his injured arm, seeming so naturally at home in their small family setting. After dinner, with her uncle tactfully retiring early with a book, Hannah and Vaughn stood at the window overlooking the main street, now quiet in the evening hours. "What happens now?" Hannah asked, voicing the question that had been hovering between them. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, his profile limned by the soft lamplight. "I received a telegram today," he finally said. "From my employer. They're expecting me back as soon as I'm fit to ride." Hannah's heart sank, though she had known this moment would come. I see, and when will that be? Doc says another week should see me fit enough for light duties. Vaughn turned to face her fully. But Hannah, I've been thinking a lot during these days in that cabin, about my life, about what I want from it. And what is it you want? She asked quietly. Not to be a hired gun pushing someone else's cattle across the territories anymore, he answered with certainty. I want what I've always dreamed of, my own place, land under my feet that belongs to me where I can build something lasting. His eyes held hers intently. And I find I don't want to build it alone. Hannah's breath caught. Vaughn. He took her hands in his. I know it's fast, some might say foolishly fast. We've known each other less than a month, but I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Hannah Turner. Nor I for you, she whispered, her heart pounding. There's a parcel of land for sale about 10 miles west of here, Vaughn continued. Good water, good grazing. I saw it before the ambush and couldn't stop thinking about it. I have savings enough for a down payment and basic stock. It wouldn't be much to start with, but it would be ours, Hannah finished for him, understanding dawning. Vaughn nodded, a smile breaking across his face at her use of ours. Yes, ours, if you want it to be. Are you asking me to marry you, Vaughn Adler? Hannah's voice was steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. I am, he replied simply. I love you, Hannah. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing alone at that dance, looking like you wanted to disappear and dance all at once. I know it's sudden and maybe even foolish, but Hannah stopped his words with a kiss, rising on her toes to press her lips firmly against his. When she pulled back, there were tears shining in her eyes. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a ranch with you. Yes to all of it. Vaughn laughed, a sound of pure joy, and wrapped his good arm around her waist, lifting her slightly off the floor in his enthusiasm. Hannah laughed with him, feeling lighter than she had in years. Your uncle might have something to say about this, Vaughn said as he set her down. Suddenly looking concerned, Hannah shook her head with a smile. Uncle Henry has been watching us these past weeks. I think he's been expecting this conversation. Besides, he told me just yesterday that he's never seen me look so happy. And are you happy? Vaughn's expression was tender as he searched her face. Happier than I ever thought I could be again, Hannah answered truthfully. 6 weeks later, Hannah Turner became Hannah Adler in a simple ceremony at Willow Creek's small church. The entire town turned out for the occasion, having watched the whirlwind romance unfold with interest and mostly approval. Even Uncle Henry, who had indeed given his blessing with minimal hesitation, shed a tear as he walked his niece down the aisle. Hannah wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Patterson and several other town ladies had helped her make, adorned with lace from her mother's wedding gown that she'd brought west with her. Vaughn, fully recovered from his wound, cut a striking figure in a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion but still curling slightly at the nape of his neck. You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen, he whispered as they turned to face the minister. And you are the most handsome groom, Hannah whispered back, and the only one I ever want to dance with for the rest of my days. After the ceremony, the town's celebrations spilled into the street. Tables laden with food lined the boardwalks, musicians played lively tunes, and lanterns were strung across Main Street for when evening fell. It was, many agreed, the most joyful gathering Willow Creek had seen in years. As promised, Vaughn and Hannah danced every dance together, moving with the same natural harmony they had discovered that first night. When they finally took a break, finding a quiet moment amid the celebration, Marshal Reynolds approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Adler, he greeted them with a tip of his hat. My congratulations to you both. Thank you, Marshal, Vaughn replied, his arm secure around Hannah's waist. And thank you for your help with Buck Harley. The lawman nodded. Actually, that's partly why I wanted to speak with you. Harley will be serving a considerable sentence for his prior offenses. You won't need to worry about him for quite some time. Relief washed over Hannah. Though they had been assured of Harley's arrest, having confirmation that he would not threaten their new beginning was a wedding gift she deeply appreciated. "That's good to hear," Vaughn said, extending his hand to the marshal. "We're much obliged." As Reynolds walked away, Hannah leaned into her husband's embrace. "It seems we've been granted a fresh start in every way possible." "Indeed we have," Vaughn agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I intend to make the most of it starting tomorrow when we move into our new home." Their new home was still very much a work in progress. The land Vaughn had purchased came with a small, sturdy cabin that they had spent the past weeks renovating with help from townspeople. It was simple but sound, and would serve them well until they could build something larger. A corral housed their small but growing herd 6 cows, a bull and 3 horses, including Vaughn's beloved Maverick. The next morning, after a night spent in the finest room at Willow Creek's hotel, a wedding gift from the mayor and several business owners, Vaughn helped Hannah into the wagon that would take them to their ranch. Her few belongings were packed alongside supplies for their new household. Uncle Henry had insisted on gifting them with essential items from the store, and other wedding presents: quilts, kitchen tools, a clock, even a small bookshelf were carefully secured for the journey. "Ready, Mrs. Adler?" Vaughn asked as he took the reins, a smile playing at his lips as he used her new name. "Ready, Mr. Adler," she replied, her heart full as she took one last look at the town that had brought them together. The journey to their new home took just over an hour. As they crested the final rise, Hannah caught her breath at the view spread before them. Rolling hills covered in spring grass, a creek winding through the property, the cabin situated on a gentle slope with mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It will be even more beautiful once we've put our mark on it," Vaughn said, guiding the wagon down the slope. "I was thinking we might plant some trees near the house for shade in summer and to break the winter winds." "And a garden," Hannah added eagerly. "We could grow vegetables, maybe some flowers. Anything you want," Vaughn promised as they pulled up in front of the cabin. "This is our land now, Hannah. We can shape it however we choose." He set the brake and jumped down, then reached up to help her from the wagon. But instead of setting her on the ground, Vaughn swept Hannah into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my bride across our threshold," he replied seriously, though his eyes danced with happiness. "It's tradition, or so I'm told." Hannah pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition." The cabin was simple but clean and bright, with new curtains at the windows, another wedding gift, and a braided rug on the plank floor. A fireplace dominated one wall, with a small kitchen area adjacent to it. A table and chairs stood ready for meals, and through a doorway, Hannah could see the bedroom with its new bed frame and the quilt she had worked on secretly during Vaughn's recovery. "Welcome home, Hannah," Vaughn said softly as he set her on her feet inside the door. "Home," she repeated, looking around with wonder. After months of feeling adrift, she had found not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. Yes, this is home now. The first year on their ranch brought challenges neither Hannah nor Vaughn had fully anticipated. The summer was unusually dry, forcing them to dig a deeper well to ensure water for their stock. Fall brought early frosts that damaged the garden Hannah had so lovingly tended. Winter descended with fierce storms that tested the cabin's weatherproofing and kept them isolated for weeks at a time. Yet for every hardship, there were moments of profound joy and satisfaction. The birth of their first calves in the spring, expanding their herd beyond what they'd hoped for the first year. The completion of a proper barn before winter set in, built with help from neighbors and Uncle Henry. The gradual transformation of the cabin into a true home, filled with small touches that reflected their growing life together. Through it all, Hannah and Vaughn's bond deepened. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, when to lean on one another and when to provide space. Their passionate attraction evolved into a steady love built on shared work, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment to the life they were creating together. On their first anniversary, Vaughn surprised Hannah with a trip back to Willow Creek for a special dinner at the hotel. Afterward, they visited the dance hall where they had first met, now quiet on a weeknight with just a few patrons scattered at tables. "Dance with me?" Vaughn asked, extending his hand to his wife. "Always," Hannah replied, rising from her chair. "Though there's hardly anyone here and no music playing." Vaughn gestured to a man in the corner who nodded and began to play a soft tune on his fiddle. "I made arrangements," he explained with a smile. "I wanted to dance with you where it all began." As they moved together across the floor, Hannah marveled at how far they had come in just 1 year. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. Settling down so quickly, giving up the freedom of the trail, Vaughn's arms tightened around her. "Not for a single moment," he answered firmly. "The trail was never freedom for me, Hannah. It was running from attachment, from responsibility, from the pain of losing people I cared about. What we've built together, that's true freedom." Hannah rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you, Vaughn Adler. And I love you, Hannah Adler, more with each passing day." They danced in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Vaughn spoke again. "I have something to tell you," he said, a note of excitement in his voice. "I received word yesterday that our bid on the Sanderson parcel was accepted." Hannah looked up in surprise. The neighboring property had come up for sale the previous month, and they had scraped together every penny they could spare to make an offer. "Truly, it's ours." 160 additional acres, Vaughn confirmed with a grin. "Room to expand our herd, better access to water, and that stand of timber we've had our eye on." "Oh, Vaughn," Hannah exclaimed, forgetting their dance to throw her arms around his neck. "This means we can build a proper house, doesn't it? With more than one bedroom." "It does indeed," he said, his eyes sparkling with happiness. "Which is fortunate timing, considering." Hannah stepped back slightly, studying his face. "Considering what?" Vaughn's expression softened with tenderness. "Considering you might have news of your own to share, news you've been hinting at for the past week." Hannah's hand instinctively went to her stomach, a blush rising to her cheeks. "How did you know? I wasn't certain myself until yesterday." "I know you, Hannah Adler, better than I know myself sometimes." Vaughn's voice was thick with emotion as he placed his hand over hers. "A baby, we're having a baby," Hannah nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "In about 7 months, if my calculations are correct." Vaughn let out a whoop that startled the few patrons of the dance hall, then swept Hannah into a careful embrace. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family is growing." They finished their dance with new dreams taking shape between them. A larger house with room for children to run and play, expanded herds that would provide security for their growing family. Years stretching before them filled with work and love, and the life they were building together. As they left the dance hall, stepping out into the star-filled night, Hannah couldn't help but think of that first evening, how alone she had felt, how certain she was that no one would ever ask her to dance. How everything had changed when a tall cowboy with kind eyes had approached and asked her to save him every dance. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked, noticing her contemplative expression as he helped her into their wagon. "About how differently my life might have turned out if you hadn't been at that dance," Hannah replied honestly. "If you hadn't seen me standing alone and decided to approach a stranger." Vaughn settled beside her on the seat, taking the reins in one hand and wrapping his other arm around her shoulders. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are simply meant to be." As they drove back toward their ranch under the vast Colorado sky, Hannah leaned into her husband's embrace. From lonely newcomer to beloved wife, from uncertain future to a life rich with purpose and love, all because of a dance that had led to forever. "You know," she said softly as their home came into view in the moonlight, "I think I still owe you a few dances." Vaughn's laugh was warm in the night air. "And I intend to collect on every single one, Mrs. Adler, for the rest of our days." 5 years passed. bringing changes that Hannah and Vaughn embraced with the same determination and love that had characterized their impulsive beginning. Their first child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, was joined 2 years later by a son, Henry James, named for Hannah's uncle who had passed peacefully in his sleep the previous winter. The ranch prospered under their care, growing from its modest beginnings into one of the most respected operations in the territory. The small cabin had given way to a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch where the family gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset. Vaughn had developed a reputation for breeding quality horses alongside their cattle operation, drawing buyers from as far away as Denver. Hannah managed the household and finances with the same efficiency she had once applied to her uncle's store, while also teaching their children their letters and numbers until they were old enough for the schoolhouse in town. Their life was not without challenges. The boom and bust cycles of ranching tested their resilience more than once. A particularly harsh winter 3 years into their marriage had decimated herds throughout the territory, forcing them to start rebuilding almost from scratch. There had been illness, Emma's frightening fever that had kept them awake for 3 nights straight, Vaughn's broken leg after being thrown from a green broke horse that had left him bedridden for weeks. Yet through it all, their partnership had only strengthened. The quick attraction that had sparked between a lonely newcomer and a drifting cowboy had matured into something enduring, a love built on shared struggle and triumph, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Willow Creek held its Founders' Day celebration once again. Much had changed in the town since Hannah had first arrived feeling like an outsider. New buildings lined the main street, the population had nearly doubled, and a proper railway station now connected them to larger cities. Hannah stood at the edge of the familiar dance hall, watching as Vaughn twirled their daughter across the floor, Emma's giggles carrying over the music as her father carefully guided her small feet. Henry, not yet 3, was perched on Hannah's hip, his head resting against her shoulder as he fought to stay awake despite the late hour. "They're growing so fast," came a voice beside her. Hannah turned to find Sarah Miller, now Sarah Jenkins after her marriage to the blacksmith's son, watching the scene with a smile. "Too fast," Hannah agreed, shifting Henry's weight. "I can hardly believe Emma will start school next year." "You've built a beautiful family," Sarah said warmly. "And quite a successful ranch from what I hear." Vaughn Adler settled down, and one of the most respected ranchers in the county. Who would have thought it? Hannah laughed softly. "It surprised no one more than him, I think." As the song ended, Vaughn led Emma back to where Hannah stood, the little girl's face flushed with excitement. "Mama, did you see? I only stepped on Papa's toes twice." "I saw, darling. You're becoming quite the dancer," Hannah replied, smoothing her daughter's dark hair so like Vaughn's. "Just like her mother," Vaughn said, his eyes meeting Hannah's over Emma's head with the same warmth they had held from the beginning. "Papa, can we dance again?" Emma asked, tugging at his hand. Vaughn glanced at Hannah, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course, sweetheart. But first, I think your brother needs to be put to bed, and I promised your mother a dance myself." "Mrs. Jenkins was just saying she'd be happy to take Henry for a bit, weren't you, Sarah?" Hannah said, turning to her friend with a questioning look. Sarah laughed, holding out her arms. "Absolutely. My Jacob is asleep in the back room with my mother watching over him. I'll put this little one down beside him for a while." With Henry transferred to Sarah's care, and Emma sent to enjoy a cookie with her young friends at the refreshment table, Hannah found herself alone with Vaughn for the first time that evening. "Mrs. Adler," he said formally, offering his arm with a playful bow. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" "Why, Mr. Adler," Hannah replied in the same spirit, "I believe I've been saving them all for you." As they moved onto the dance floor, the musicians began a slow waltz, the same tune they had danced to on the night they met. Vaughn's hand at her waist was as steady and sure as it had been then, but now carried the familiar comfort of years together. 5 years, he murmured as they swayed to the music. Sometimes it feels like we've been together forever, and other times I still can't believe my luck in finding you. Hannah smiled up at her husband, noting the new lines around his eyes earned from squinting into the sun and from laughter with their children. His hair had a few strands of silver now at the temples, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever known. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked. "About being perfectly matched because we both claimed to be terrible dancers," Vaughn chuckled. "I remember. I also remember thinking it was the worst excuse I'd ever come up with to talk to a beautiful woman." "It worked, didn't it?" Hannah teased. "Better than I could have imagined." Vaughn pulled her closer, their bodies moving in perfect harmony after years of dancing together both literally and figuratively. "You know, I've been thinking about that parcel to the north that came up for sale last month." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "The old Wilson homestead. Vaughn, we agreed we couldn't expand again so soon after building the new barn." I know, but hear me out." His eyes shone with the familiar excitement that appeared whenever he envisioned new possibilities for their ranch. The creek on that property would solve our irrigation issues permanently. And with the price of beef climbing, if we could increase our herd by even 20%. Hannah laughed, shaking her head fondly, always dreaming bigger. "Someone has to," Vaughn replied with a grin. "Besides, I seem to recall a certain woman who once convinced me I could stay and build something in one place when I was ready to run. Seems to me her dreams were pretty big too." "Fair point," Hannah conceded. "Let's discuss it tomorrow. Tonight is for celebrating how far we've already come." As the dance continued, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a lonely wallflower certain no one would ask her to dance, to a confident woman surrounded by love and purpose. From a drifting cowboy afraid to put down roots to a man who had built a legacy for his children. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful stories," Hannah replied. "And about how grateful I am that you asked me to save you every dance." Vaughn's eyes softened with understanding. "Best decision I ever made." As the music drew to a close, their children returned, Emma tugging at her father's hand for another dance, Henry rubbing sleepy eyes as Sarah returned him to Hannah's arms. The young family moved to the edge of the dance floor, Vaughn lifting Emma to stand on his boots as he had done since she was barely able to walk, while Hannah swayed gently with Henry against her shoulder. Around them, the community that had witnessed their beginning continued its celebration, new stories unfolding amid the music and laughter. But for Hannah and Vaughn Adler, the most meaningful story was the one they continued to write together, a tale of love that had begun with a simple dance and grown into a lifetime of cherished moments. And as they caught each other's eyes over their children's heads, the promise they had made years ago remained unbroken. Every dance saved for each other, for all the days to come.